everyone, welcome back to Playing Quietly. My name is Ryan, and today I am bringing you another Remnant to TheAwakenedKing build guide. Today we're going to be talking about what I like to call the Plague Inferno build. Now before we get into the guide proper, I just want to make sure that people understand from the outset, this is not meant to be a top tier build. It is more of a fun riff on a much better build. That being said, it is still Apocalypse viable. I have cleared the entirety of the Awakened King on Apocalypse with this build, and it did just fine. So let's go ahead and dive in. In our primary archetype slot, we're going to be running Medic so that we have access to the Regenerator Prime perk. We're going to be using this in tandem with our Resonating Heart and our summons from our Summoner archetype. For the skill, I like to run the Healing Shield just so that we get a little bit of extra tankiness. As discussed before, in our secondary slot, we are going to be running the Summoner archetype. For this skill, we are going to be using either the Flyer minions or the Ground minions. Personally, I like the Flyer minions just because they have a little bit extra reach to them and they are ranged, so I find them to be far more useful than the two little ground guys. For our armor, we're going to be using a full set of Leto Mark 1, and we are going to have a weight of 95, which is red, so we are going to be getting the fatty flop. But don't worry, we're not going to be dodging a whole lot, if ever. Also, as discussed before, we are going to be using the Resonating Heart in our Relic. For our Relic fragments, we are going to be running Mythic Armor Effectiveness, Mythic Health, Mythic Damage Reduction. Moving on to our jewelry slots, starting out in the Talisman, we are going to be using the Effluvium Enhancer, as this is a acid and corrosive build. This is going to increase our acid damage by 20% and our corrosive damage by 50%. Next up, in our first ring slot, we are going to be using the Dense Silicon Ring, which, as mentioned before, is going to work in tandem with how we are going to be using Resonating Heart, which is going to help us generate our mod power. Next up, we are going to be using the Burden of the Divine. This is going to decrease all of our damage dealt by 10%, but 50% of our healing is going to go to our allies. After that, we are going to be using the Band of the Fanatic. This is going to increase status effect damage by 20% and reduce status effect duration by 65%. And in our final ring slot, we're going to be using the Hardcore Metal Band. Taking damage adds 1 stack of Bulwark, which individually falls off after 10 seconds, and we're going to have a max of 5 stacks. In the long gun slot, I like to run the Sparkfire Shotgun. However, it doesn't necessarily matter what gun you run here as long as it has 2 open slots. What is important is the mod that we use here. We are going to be wanting to run Firestorm. This is going to create a whirling cyclone that sucks in nearby targets and applies burning for 3.5 seconds. The center of the cyclone is going to deal 258.8 fire damage per second and last 15 seconds. In the mutator slot, I like to run Fetid Wounds. This is going to increase our critical chance for this weapon by 5% per unique negative status effect on the enemy, with a max of 15%. At level 10, this weapon's ranged, weak point, and ranged crit hits apply Corroded, dealing 77 corroded damage over 3.5 seconds. Moving over to our handgun, we are going to be running the Nebula. This is going to fire a stream of super hot acid gas, which applies the Corroded effect, dealing 661.5 corrosive damage over 5.2 seconds. Killing targets corroded by Nebula spawns a gas cloud, which applies its on-hit effect. Gas clouds last 2 seconds, can be refreshed. The onboard mod for Nebula is going to be Nanoswarm. This is going to unleash a swarm of nanomachines that seek after enemies within 20 meters and repeatedly attack, dealing 24.3 acid damage per hit. Lasts 15 seconds. And in the mutator slot, we are going to be running Twisted Wounds. This is going to increase the range damage of this weapon by 20% to bleeding targets, and at level 10, this weapon's ranged weak point and ranged crit hits apply bleeding damage of 294 bleed damage over 3.5 seconds. In our final weapon slot, we have 2 options here. The first and best option is going to be the World's Edge. World's Edge onboard mod is Horizon Strike. Charge attacks release a wide horizontal projectile that penetrates through multiple enemies, dealing 48 damage. And we are going to pair this with Tainted Blade. Tainted Blade increases melee damage by 20% per stack of corroded on the target. At level 10, charged melee attacks are going to apply corroded, dealing 500 acid damage over 20 seconds. Now, if we don't have World's Edge, there is a far easier option to obtain here, the Gas Giant. Taking a look at our traits, we are going to, of course, get Regrowth and Triage by nature of our 2 archetypes. Other than that, we are going to go 10 points into Fortify for our 50% armor effectiveness. We are going to go 10 points into Kinship for our 80% friendly fire damage reduction. We are going to go to level 8 in Vigor for our plus 24 health. 9 points to bring us to level 10 into Spirit for our 20% mod power generation. 10 points into Bark Skin for 10% damage reduction. 10 points into Blood Bond for another 10% of our summons damage absorption. 10 points into Bloodstream to increase Gray Health regeneration by 3. 10 points into Rugged to give our summons 100% extra health. And finally, 10 points into Siphoner for our 3% lifesteal. Alright, so let's take a look at how the basic rotation of this build is going to go on our target dummies here. Of course, we're going to start off by summoning first. We're going to run in with our shotgun and lay down our tornado. We're going to put our nano swarm up, and then we are going to unload with our nebula. Now, we see here we're basically able to keep a constant tornado going, and this is basically single target here, and we're really able to keep about 1500 constant DPS going. Alright, so target dummies are all well and good, but let's see how this does in a real-world combat scenario. We're going to start off with our Nano Swarm, as these guys aren't any really big deal. As soon as he comes down, we are going to get him with our Tornado. We're going to pop our shield just to make sure. Oh, there we go. He doesn't want to come down. Alright, so then, once we start taking damage, we are going to pop our heart. We already have another Nano Swarm up, as well as another Tornado. Taking basically no damage. We'll pop another heart just to be safe. Easy peasy, nothing to it. Get our fatty flop. No problem whatsoever. And just for one last point, again, some people may say, Ryan, you did damage on target dummies, no one cares. You did damage on regular trash, no one cares. You did damage on an aberration, no one cares. Let's see it on a boss fight. So we have our Apocalypse boss fight. This is just the first one that I happen to come across in the TheAwakenedKing DLC. It is one of the easier bosses, but we are still going to go take a look at it, as it is not necessarily an ideal fight for this spec, but we're just going to see how it holds up. So we're going to start off, we got our Nano Swarm. We are going to get our Pyro on there. And we're going to get under here and I don't think our... There we go, we're hitting her up there. Are we? Don't forget to do our heart. So we've already got her down to about 1/3 health. Where she is anybody's guess. Oh, there she is, alright. Send a shockwave her way. Not able to get any Nano Swarm just yet. There we go. Hit her with Firestorm. And we are taking damage. No problem. Popping another heart. Again, this is not an ideal setup, but we are doing just fine. Walk through the fire, get our stacks, pop another heart. Ooh, that didn't hurt. We're fine. Pop another heart just because. And we'll give her one more Firestorm. And again, this is Apocalypse difficulty. We're basically doing nothing, and we're doing decent damage. Killed her quite fast. Alright guys, that's all I've got for you today. Remember, this is just kind of a rift on a much better build, but I think this build does make some pretty good improvements on that other build, in that we are able to actually dish out a pretty significant amount of damage. As you guys saw from some of the footage, we are able to do a ton of damage with the World's Edge plus the Tainted Blade. Also, with most of my builds, think of it as a jumping off point. If there's any improvements that you can think of, and I'm sure there are quite a lot, let me know in the comments down below. Other than that, if you found this video helpful or entertaining, hopefully I've earned your subscription. And keep checking back for more Remnant 2 content. Until then, we'll see you guys next time. Have yourselves a good one.